It was nearly 10 o'clock at night, and the Walmart on the east side of Columbus was quieter than usual, with only the sound of shopping cart wheels rolling across the polished tile floor and the steady stream of promotional announcements coming through the overhead speakers. Tasha Greene stood at checkout lane 12 one hand, holding a worn wallet, while the other carefully poured quarters, dimes, and nickels from a small plastic bag onto the counter. Beside her, Aaliyah silently gripped the strap of her backpack, her 10-year-old eyes fixed on the total rising across the screen. There were no expensive groceries in the cart, and nothing was meant for either of them. There were only 6 small duffel bags, several sets of children's pajamas, new socks, toothbrushes, toothpaste, 6 stuffed animals, and cards written in Aaliyah's neat, rounded handwriting. "This bag belongs to you." The cashier counted the money again, then gently shook her head. Tasha was still $6.73 short. Behind her, a tall man in a gray coat stood quietly, showing none of the impatience of the other customers. Darius Whitfield had just left one of his company's distribution centers after an inspection that had stretched on for hours, and he had only stopped at Walmart to buy pain relievers before heading home. He was still wearing the simple clothes he used when inspecting warehouses, so no one around him recognized that the man patiently waiting his turn was the founder of a multi-billion-dollar logistics company. He had been watching Tasha since she began stacking the coins into small piles, but it was only when he saw the words on the card lying between the pajamas that his expression changed. Tasha reached into the cart and picked up a teddy bear. "I'll leave this one behind." Aaliyah looked at the bear, then at her mother. She spoke very softly, as though she were afraid her voice might break something in the cold, brightly lit space of the store. "Maybe the child who gets that bag will need it more than the pajamas." Tasha's hand stopped. The man behind her took half a step forward. His eyes remained on the bags, but for a few seconds he could no longer see the checkout counter or the white lights overhead. He was seeing an 8-year-old boy clutching a black trash bag to his chest, standing in front of a strange house and not knowing where he would sleep that night. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and measured. "Who are those bags for?" Tasha looked up, slightly surprised by the stranger's question. For a few seconds, she considered whether she should answer, then gently pulled a blue bag toward her. "They're for children who have to leave their homes in the middle of the night," she said. "Many of them arrive at emergency care centers with nothing but the clothes they're wearing." The man looked down at the teddy bear in her hand. More than 40 years earlier, he had also stood in front of a strange door, holding a black trash bag containing 2 old shirts and a pair of mismatched socks. No one had told him those things belonged to him. No one had told him how long he would be staying. "I'll pay for everything," he said. Tasha immediately shook her head. "That's not necessary. Please let me help." She looked directly at him, not coldly but firmly. "You can pay the $6.73. Just the amount I'm short." After a moment of silence, he nodded and handed his card to the cashier. While the items were being placed into bags, Tasha briefly explained that 2 years earlier she had been in a car accident. Aaliyah had spent 3 nights in a temporary care center without pajamas, without a toothbrush, and without knowing when her mother would return. Since then, every month, the 2 of them had put together a few bags for children facing similar circumstances. "What organization do you work with?" the man asked. Tasha gave him a tired smile. "No organization at all. Just my kitchen in a corner of the church basement." He handed her a business card. Tasha did not look at his title. She simply slipped it into her coat pocket and pushed the card away. Darius Whitfield remained beneath the white lights, watching the mother and daughter as though he had just seen a part of his own life walk past him. The next morning, Tasha and Aaliyah brought the 6 bags to the County Children's Intake Center, an aging building with cream-colored walls and rows of faded plastic chairs. Monique Harris met them at the door, exhaustion from too many sleepless nights clearly visible on her face. She told them that in just 1 week, the center had taken in 11 children, while the donation room was nearly empty. Tasha said nothing and simply helped Aaliyah arrange each bag on the long table in the hallway. As the mother and daughter were preparing to leave, a social services vehicle pulled up outside. A boy of about 12 stepped out, clutching a black trash bag tightly against his chest. He did not cry or look at anyone. He simply stood there with his shoulders rigid as though he had learned not to expect anything from adults. Tasha recognized that look. 2 years earlier, Aaliyah had looked at her the same way after her days in temporary care. She picked up the blue bag, knelt down at a comfortable distance from the boy, and gently slid it toward him. "Everything inside belongs to you." The boy stared at the bag for a long time before asking, "Even the bag is mine?" "Yes," Tasha replied. "The bag, too." At the end of the hallway, Darius Whitfield stood silently. He had found the address from a paper label attached to one of the items the night before and had quietly come there. The moment Monique saw him, she recognized him. She walked over and lowered her voice, telling him that the foundation bearing the Whitfield name had promised funding to the center months earlier, but we never received that money. The smile disappeared from Darius's face. That afternoon, Darius returned to the Whitfield Foundation headquarters and asked Claire Donnelly to bring every funding record related to children in the foster care system into the conference room. Thick reports quickly covered the glass tabletop. On paper, his foundation had spent more than $3 million over 2 years, a figure large enough to make any donor feel proud. But as Darius traced each line of the budget, all he saw was money allocated to conferences, research, branding consultants, awareness campaigns, and lavish fundraising events. Only a very small portion had actually reached the children's intake centers. Claire calmly explained that every expense was legal approved by the board and consistent with established procedures. Darius did not get angry with her. What troubled him more was realizing that he had personally signed those reports without ever setting foot inside a center like the one he had visited that morning. Across town, Tasha turned the key in the ignition for the 3rd time, but the engine only made a dry clicking sound before falling silent. She remained still behind the wheel, staring at the crumpled repair estimate in her hand. Most of the money she had set aside for the repairs had been used to buy the 6 bags the night before. Aaliyah sat beside her in silence for a long time before finally saying, "You always say those children need you, but sometimes I need you too." Those words hurt Tasha more than any bill ever could. Her phone buzzed. Her hospital manager informed her that because she had been late for the 2nd time that month, all of her overtime shifts would be cut for 4 weeks. Tasha looked at her daughter, then at the car that would not start, knowing that next month's rent had just become a serious problem. 3 days later, Tasha received an invitation to the Whitfield Foundation headquarters. In a conference room high above the city, Claire Donnelly presented the No Child Carries a Trash Bag campaign, complete with emotional video clips and a plan to distribute thousands of bags. The compensation offered to Tasha was enough to repair her car, pay the rent, and make up for the overtime shifts she had just lost. But when Claire moved on to the media portion of the presentation, Tasha saw her own name, and Aaliyah's displayed on the screen as the campaign's 2 central figures. An advertising company had even proposed recreating the moment Aaliyah was taken into temporary care with cameras following the little girl's face as she cried. Tasha clenched her hands beneath the table. "My daughter is not advertising material." Claire explained that personal stories would make the public care more. Darius sat at the far end of the table, silently watching as Tasha turned through the contract. She had no authority over which items would be included, where the bags would be distributed, or how the budget would be used. They wanted her face, but they did not want to give her a voice. "I can't sign this," Tasha said as she stood up. Claire looked at her as though she could not understand why someone who needed money would turn down such an opportunity. Darius did not stop her from leaving. When Tasha reached her apartment past due, rent notice had been taped to the door. Aaliyah looked at the paper and quietly asked, "Do you regret it?" Tasha kept her hand on the doorknob for a long time, but she could not answer. The next morning, Tasha took out the business card that had remained untouched in her coat pocket for days and called Darius. She did not ask him to pay her rent, fix her broken car, or help her get her overtime shifts back. She only said that if the Whitfield Foundation truly wanted to do something for children like Jalen, they needed to meet again. But this time, she would bring a plan of her own. In the conference room, Tasha placed a thin stack of papers on the table covered with notes corrected in pencil. She required that people who had lived in the foster care system have seats on the governing board, that local centers be allowed to choose the appropriate supplies, that images of children not be used as fundraising tools, and that most of the budget go directly to the people who needed it. She also made it clear that she did not want to become an inspirational face standing in front of cameras without any decision-making authority. Darius listened, while Claire frowned when she reached the section giving Tasha a role in overseeing the budget. She pointed out that Tasha had never run an organization, managed suppliers, or been responsible for an audit. This time, Tasha did not argue because Claire was not entirely wrong. "Then, let's start small," she said. "One county 3 months with every expense made public and an independent audit." Darius looked at the two women sitting across from each other and agreed. But when Tasha said she would volunteer outside her regular working hours, he shook his head. If this work has value, he said, the person doing it should be paid. The offer left Tasha silent. Accepting it meant stepping away from the stability of the hospital and into a program that might fail before it had the chance to prove anything. Tasha agreed to run the pilot program, but she kept a few weekend shifts at the hospital so she would not completely cut herself off from her old life. The first few weeks quickly proved that good intentions could not replace experience. One supplier sent all the wrong clothing sizes, the storage space developed leaks after a heavy rainstorm, and one intake center refused to accept the bags because the inventory paperwork was missing a signature. Claire and Tasha argued constantly, but every disagreement forced them to find a better way of doing things. The night before the program was officially scheduled to begin, a pipe in the warehouse ceiling suddenly burst. Water poured down over the packed boxes, soaking nearly half of the blanket's clothing and stuffed animals. Tasha stood in the middle of the wreckage, her shoes submerged in cold water, feeling as though 3 months of hard work were dissolving right before her eyes. Aaliyah looked at the empty shelves and picked up her mother's phone. She did not talk about the accident, mention the rent, or bring up the Walmart video. She simply filmed the warehouse and clearly explained which items the program needed. Less than an hour later, people began to arrive. A white laundromat owner brought new blankets. A black sorority arrived with personal care supplies. A Latino veteran delivered dozens of backpacks, and Walmart employees volunteered to gather enough items to replace everything that had been damaged. Darius arrived after midnight. With no reporters and no cameras present, he took off his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and sat on the floor packing bags with everyone else. As she watched him quietly place a card inside each bag, Tasha believed for the first time that he no longer wanted only to fund the program. He had begun to understand it. 3 months later, Tasha walked into the Whitfield Foundation conference room carrying a black trash bag. The pilot program had provided hundreds of bags to children at intake centers, but the financial report showed that the cost per bag was higher than the board had expected. Some members argued that the project was too small to make an impact and too expensive to expand. Claire stood in front of the screen, presenting each figure with her usual precision. When she finished, the room fell silent. Tasha did not respond with a speech. She placed the trash bag on the table, then set a blue bag like the one Jalen carried beside it. Finally, she opened a report from the intake center showing that children who had personal belongings were often calmer during the first hours after being removed from their homes. With Jalen's permission, Monique read part of a letter from him. He did not appear on camera, nor was he brought into the room as living evidence. In the letter, Jalen simply wrote that for the first time he had something he could carry from one place to another without having to ask anyone's permission. Darius stood and admitted that his foundation had once spent more money talking about pain than reducing it. However, he did not decide the program's future on his own. Under the new structure, community representatives had voting power equal to that of the donors. The final vote belonged to Claire. She looked at Tasha, then marked the box in favor. The program was approved for expansion into 3 counties. As everyone stood, Claire quietly said that Tasha had proven compassion and financial responsibility were not opposing choices. Tasha looked at the trash bag on the table, knowing that from that day forward, fewer children would have to walk through a strange door with their entire lives contained inside it. 6 months later, the cramped church basement had been replaced by a small warehouse with bright windows, clearly labeled rows of shelves, and a fully paid staff. On the wall near the entrance was a sign bearing the name First Night Project, but Tasha still kept the first black trash bag in her desk drawer as a reminder of why the program existed. She had completed her first semester in the social work program and moved with Aaliyah into a better apartment where the girl had her own room and a study desk beside the window. It was not a gift Darius had quietly purchased for them, but the result of the work Tasha had built and the salary she deserved to earn. Claire established a transparent auditing system for the entire project while Darius changed the way the Whitfield Foundation distributed its funding, placing people who had lived in the foster care system in positions with real decision-making authority. Jalen still had not been adopted. His life did not change through a convenient miracle. He still had to move to a new foster family, but he had joined the school basketball team and always kept the blue bag beneath his bed where he could see it every morning. One late autumn afternoon, Tasha and Aaliyah were at the intake center when a little girl was brought in. She held a trash bag against her chest, her frightened eyes scanning the unfamiliar room. Aaliyah took a purple bag with a blank white name tag from the shelf, walked over, and sat down at the girl's eye level. "What's your name?" Aaliyah asked. The girl said her name in a voice barely above a whisper. Aaliyah carefully wrote each letter on the tag, then handed her the bag. At the end of the hallway, Darius stood quietly watching without stepping into the scene. Because sometimes changing a life does not begin with a large check or a grand promise. It begins when we see another person's pain, listen to what they truly need, and help them preserve their dignity. Some children cannot choose where they will sleep tonight, but at the very least, they deserve to walk through that door carrying something with their name on it that truly belongs to them.